Vampire the Masquerade is well, I want to say traditional role-playing game, but that wouldn't be correct, because in this regard, you are actually playing, I'm not going to say the antagonist, but you are the monster. Ultimately, you are the thing that should not be. You are the thing that is behind the curtain. And that ends up meaning that you have to end up taking a slightly different approach through life, whatever you float your boat in that regard.
An alternate existence.
Yeah.
I think that's a politically correct term for vampires.
Oh, yeah. This is a game where you're free to end up being a little bit more on the edge. I mean, I'm an edgelord, and I'm proud of it. I've never made apologies for that. But just to end up giving you guys a small bit, Vampire is set in the now, modern day. I mean, you exist in a world with cell phones, laptops. You exist with, a whole bunch of technologies that make life a bit of a pain in the ass. And the big thing with Vampire, especially with 5th edition, is it's trying to force in a more personal story. Because what started to happen with Vampire, because this is its 5th edition, it's been around the block more than a few times.
Yes, it has. It's a venerable RP system.
Yeah, and one of the things that ended up kicking off was the fact that we ended up running into all these situations where life, the Camarilla, the ivory tower that held most vampire politics amongst the world and trying to end up controlling the kind, human beings. Well, one of the problems that would oftentimes happen is trying to keep this secret requires a lot of ingenuity. Unfortunately, we have hit a point, and the tipping point is that the meta got too large. The overall story with Hardstadt, with the supposed coming of Gehenna, which is the vampire's version of the apocalypse, the end of the world, right? So what 5th edition tried to do, as far as I can read into it, is they decided to bring it back down to ground level. And how do you do this? Well, you kind of need to end up making something that happens that shakes up the world in a very strong manner. How do you do this? The first tradition, because vampires have a thing about their traditions. The first tradition is, you will not reveal your existence to those not of the blood. If anything that isn't a vampire comes out and ends up knowing that you exist, you're in for a lot of trouble.
Now, how does that relate real quick to other supernatural creatures such as, well, if we're presuming that the other entities like werewolves, mages, etc. exist, is that really not of the blood then is just vampires? Or does that mean to kind as they can't know?
Bluntly, anybody. Werewolves are a threat. Mages are a threat. Well, we can end up talking about the new Inquisition, the Second Inquisition. But there's all these different threats, all these supernatural threats, and almost all of them have reached to, in one way or another, the same conclusion. If mankind knows about us, we don't have long to go. Fact of the matter is mankind first, just from the way it's created technology and the way it's positioned itself throughout the planet, vampires need kind. It's not the other way around.
Yep.
And the sad truth is we've run into this. Oh, bro, Plier, I'm sorry to hear this. That sucks. Be well. Take care. And I do apologize, Maddie. I'm running on 2 hours sleep. But
it's fine. I saw you were going on a marathon session here.
Oh, yeah. The biggest thing, and I guess the biggest thing that I need to end up bringing this point home is it's come back down to ground level because the first tradition, that important thing, that one thing that protects vampires from the populace, has been broken. Okay, this doesn't mean every Tom, Dick, and Harry knows that vampires exist. But it does mean stuff like the CIA works. You know, most major governments, high authorities, and small organizations have realized now that for the longest of times, since Roman period and beyond, mankind has been manipulated in one way or another. This was great for vampires back in the Dark Ages, where they could lord this over their people and try and end up gaining more power, prestige, and what have you. But now it's kind of backfired. And it's backfired in a way that's become extremely dangerous. The biggest reason for this ends up coming down to how mankind can end up finding. Try and imagine being a corpse that can walk around. Now, try and imagine all the ways you could find a walking corpse. You think it's indistinguishable? No. They don't have a heat signature.
Yeah.
No. They don't sweat. They can't go into the sunlight. There are certain things that vampires tend to end up living in these dark places, the places that aren't often sought out. But now they have organizations purposely shining lights in these locations. The obvious stuff no longer works.
Yeah, well, think about it now. We have, mobile phones have 4K cameras on them that you could, like, do super zoom in. Things like thermal cameras, or even, I don't know if a vampire would show up differently in infrared, but even a lot of camcorders have sort of a night vision mode that you can look through and you can see and you can distinguish. Hey, we're in the autumn, at least here in the northern hemisphere, going into winter, and vampires, I presume, don't make a lot of puffing fog out of their mouths because, well, they don't really need to breathe. But also, even if they were, it's not getting warmed up, and moisture's not exactly escaping. And with algorithms and whatnot, search patterns. With vampires that use phones, even burner phones, they can be triangulated. It sounds like it's getting to be a lot harder to actually live off the grid, which is really the ultimate goal of every vampire, is an off the grid existence. But the grid is coming crashing down on them.
That's part of it. That's definitely a huge part of it, because again, all kindred, their word for vampire, or I should correct myself, the Camarille's word for vampire, and we're going to get into that in a minute. Typically, you've always looked for ways to influence and gain power, gain prestige, find ways to manipulate the kind, because if you can control people, if you can control the blood, who has access to it, who has the best feeding grounds, all this, you gain power. People owe you. This comes down to how vampires end up playing politics and what have you. We'll get into that in another bit, but ultimately, one thing I'll say right now, the very first bit about this book, and let me just see if I can find it. Literally, that entire section of the book, that's easily 30 pages. 30 pages of the book is literally just bits and pieces of lore and ways that people are trying to figure out how to find and kill the kindred. How they're trying to find vampires. You're one of them. Keep that in mind. You're not going after the monster. You're the monster with the world closing in. As far as many of these elder vampires being around for 2,000 years or more, the end of the world has come. Everything they have built, their entire power bases are crumbling, falling apart. These kindred who've been around for hundreds of years are now being dragged out of their havens and set to the sun, set to stake and fire and beheading. Because, quite frankly, humans don't know, outside of monster movies, what they are actually capable of. So when you start to realize that if you get caught, you being killed is not the worst thing that can happen to you. You might end up on a slab where they are going to be subjecting you to experiment after experiment, trying to figure out how exactly is the most efficient way to kill you. Or worse, because here's the thing. Power is the ultimate dynamic in vampire. And the reason that the common folk don't know that vampires exist, how much more powerful would a government get if they could unlock the secrets of this undeath?
Yep.
How much more influence could you get if you could find the secret to being able to say a word and somebody has to do it? How much more effective would your soldiers get if they could shrug off bullets like it was rain? How much more power would you end up getting if with a single speech or by your mere presence everyone in the room in a Senate meeting suddenly heeded your words as though they were gospel? This is a power that they want. So these organizations are willing to dissect you to find out. Hey, we got another new host. Sweet.
One crit, thank you for that. And, you know, as you're talking about this, too, because it almost makes then the humans the monsters, right? Because of how they would be willingly and widespreadly abusive with the same powers that, you know, vampires have used but have kept to themselves. And of course, how many times have we seen, like, you know, oh, we're going to capture aliens and learn how to make super soldiers and mind control them, you know, Weyland-Yutani stuff, etc. But when you're talking about this in the 30 pages, you reminded me that one of the channels that I watch here on Twitch is a gentleman who goes out and he does bounty hunting. And so he'll go out and he'll pick up people, he'll arrest people who have skipped out on their court dates that are being held on, that have been released on bond as an IRL. And now I imagine that dragging someone out of a house and decapitating would violate Twitch terms of service. But can you imagine other platforms where people would stream themselves going on vampire hunts, finding vampires, and in front of the internet, going on this hunt and either capturing or staking or worse a unknown vampire.
All you need is that one rogue agent who wants to be famous.
Yep.
So now it's this bit of intrigue. It's a hidden war. Because ultimately, these individuals are coming for you, one way or another. Now, there are two key responses, okay? The core book of Vampire the Masquerade covers two particular factions adequately. The Camarilla and the Anarchs. Now, you have these two different bits. The Camarilla, this is the old guard. These are the individuals who have come to power. They have built up this ivory tower that was supposed to have wealth, prestige, influence. This was age-old kindred who have continued to end up building up their legacies so they can continue on to the next century. That is crumbling. Because the second that accounts are held, that their gold bullion has been taken back, that they are now on the run. A lot of the really old ones have now gone to ground, completely zeroed out.
Yeah.
They can't be contacted. So now this overarching group that has watched over every country and started to send these dictations down, it has disappeared. The head of the serpent has been decapitated.
Yeah.
And now all of the cities are starting to become more city-states in the terms of kindred. The person who rules the location is the prince. The prince is ultimately the person who says yes or no to all Camarilla. Unfortunately, the Anarchs view this very differently. The Anarchs look at it as, okay, let me get this straight. I'm the one that's got to put my neck out for you simply on the basis of I was embraced earlier in life, when this is my century. I am closer to this century than you ever could hope to be. I have all the cards when it comes down to understanding the situation as it actually is. And this is something that most elders kind of take for granted. They embrace a child to keep them updated in the current century.
Yeah.
And this continues. Well, the Anarchs said, screw that, and said, we're done. Beforehand, the Camarilla used to get along with anarchs, specifically because if the anarchs played ball, they played by the rules. Okay, fine. We'll let you end up doing what you so choose. You can go ahead and be whatever kind of vampire you want to be, so long as you play within the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the anarchs have said, no, we are full well separated. And the Camarilla said, okay, you know what? This whole situation has gotten too big and too unwieldy. The arm is turning gangrenous. We got to hack it off now. So that's what they've effectively done, making these two opposing situations. And you get caught up in the middle of this.
What is jumping out at me with that segment is when you are a creature who has not had to change and really isn't meant to change ever since you turn. And if you are an elder and you've been around 500 years, 600, maybe even older, depending, all of a sudden, change is happening around you, and you, who are supposedly most powerful, are now powerless to stop it. You have been brought so low, and everything is in such a state of change that you're being ripped through time, forced into these modern practices and considerations. You want to talk about something that's actually terrifying, even to this elder, powerful vampire, and that's that would make even let's see, what was the term? Methuselahs? Methuselahs still exist, don't they?
In this generation, pretty much anything is left to legend. I think that's actually something that the new VTM does a lot better. Whereas the old VTM held true that Cain, the biblical figure of Cain, is the progenitor of every single vampire on the planet. Now it's, no, this is one rumor. This is one potential source, which I think plays a lot better into going back into the mystique of it, because elders have forgotten more than we will ever know in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And not all of them have the same perspectives, and not all of them have the same points. There are some scholars who want to rewrite history. There are some who will end up saying, and this was a point of contention for several clans, we'll get into those in a sec, that, no, ours was the favorite of Cain. Well, in order to do that, you got to assume that Cain is real, and you have to assume that your clan's progenitor was the favorite son of Cain. This leads into a lot of conflict. I like to think of them almost like families in old school gangster films, right? They're all part of the mob, but each family is ultimately for their own.
I get that comparison. Yep.
Now, we're going to get, let's jump over to clans, because if you're going to understand the families of the vampire, before you understand which side you will eventually take, Camarilla or Anarch, you have to understand the families. Families, at the top of the class, I'm going to end up espousing a lot of this because I end up falling true to this particular type. Ventru. Ventru are the power mongers. They are the influencers. They are the ones that hold all the cards. They're the ones with the information and the will to do. They ultimately have this noblesse of duty in their best.
Okay.
At their worst, to reference something a little bit rough, at their worst, they're almost a complete snapshot of the white man's burden. That's how a lot of them can end up viewing a lot of the clans. You end up having Tremere. Tremere used to be a rock-solid clan. They were built in a pyramid scheme where you would owe loyalty to those above you, and you were ultimately a cog in a giant machine that would end up marching along sidestep. Well, guess what? The same thing happened to your clan. The top of the head has been removed. Now all of a sudden you have splinter factions. This has never been heard of amongst Tremere. And now, because of these splinter factions, you have Tremere here starting to side with Anarchs, some going with Camarilla, and it is now a house divided. It is a solid pillar that is completely crumbled.
What that is speaking to me about as well, with you mentioned the Ventru and the Tremere here, because everything was held together and quite orderly, and the Ventru would have their own sort of what would be a comparison, like a secret society, like how Masons will get together and they'll have their meetings. Well, Ventru would talk about Ventru stuff, or in this case, the Tremere very publicly are secret, and they have their own blood magics, their own thaumaturgies, things that they would never allow outside, and if that container has broken, there might be the chance then for it's a broad power grab, and all these secrets are spilling out everywhere throughout Kindred, let alone through the possibility that mortals are finding out things that were kept for 800 years, and now all it takes is one tweet, kind of what we were talking about in I have a place chat over here, that it just takes one tweet and suddenly everyone, it becomes people become aware of it, and when they become aware of it, you gain knowledge, and what happens when you're knowledgeable about something, you don't fear it anymore, and it could even in a sense diminish the power,
and that is absolutely huge. That's one thing. I didn't like Tremere as a clan through most of the editions. I always felt like, well, each one was very elitist. Like, you had to be really good at something. They always took the cream of the crop kind of situation. The one thing that they didn't offer was the ability to show what a person without restriction could actually do with all of these abilities, and to be able to start stealing secrets. Because that's what Tremere are. They are thieves through and through. They don't want to acknowledge that, but ultimately their entire history is of theft. They stole their immortality. They stole their sorcery. They ended up stealing their servants. They stole secrets of things that should not be. They are thieves. That's ultimately what they are, and they put a very pretty coat of paint saying, "We are a pillar of the community."
I have to thank you, because in that you, when we were doing our Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines playthrough, I'm now thinking of Maximilian, who is the primogen of the Tremere in Los Angeles, as Gollum from Lord of the Rings.
That's not far off. That is not far off at all.
My precious!
Yeah. Okay. Now there's one more clan we got to talk about, because right now we got 2 out of 3 of the big Camarilla clans. And
okay.
When I say these are Camarilla clans, is ultimately these are the foundation. Everything else might be built on the sides, but you can strip out every other clan, and this would still work as a Camarilla. You strip out one of these 3, and you got a problem. And the third one comes down to Toreador. Now, what are Toreador, you ask? It's really simple. They are obsessed. People think Malkavians, another clan we'll get to, are crazy. No, that Toreador 10 times scarier. Because a Toreador ultimately can forget sometimes that it's dead. It has an opportunity to feel alive, and whatever it was that caused it to feel alive, it can start looking at and going, I need that in my life. I need to be around it. It might be a person. It might be an object. If it's an object, they will steal it, they will buy it, they will do anything to get it in their life. If it's a person, they will inject themselves into that person's life. They will steal that person away for all their attention. They will do whatever it takes to constantly drag it back.
They're also emotional vampires.
Highly, but they have a key thing. Remember, Ventru and Tremere are very structured, or at least traditionally were very, very structured clans, right? Toreador are not like that. Each one of them is independent, right? They judge each other by what they are capable of, but they themselves do not have a hierarchy so much. They are more a bunch of critics criticizing each other's work. And ultimately, because of their need to get involved, to be around kind, to feel alive again, that means they're very good boots on the ground. They're very good at hearing whispers, knowing rumors, what was said in that bar, who's going out with who ended up making an idiot of themselves, who is it that's getting in trouble, who is with who. The Toreador Harpy, the rumor monger, and bank, is oftentimes a trope, but it's a trope because their skill set and their methodology just works so well to it. These three clans form the foundation of the Camarilla. And like I said, one of them's already cracking. Venture businesses, because that's how they first started with churches, now big businesses, the power, so that's where they went. Well, guess what? CIA found out that this company was a front for what have you. So guess what? Now all of a sudden it's taken away. Adventurers lost their power base. Now they're left with very little. What do? A lot of their companies and a lot of their influence has started to crumble.
Yep.
The Tremere, their clan has effectively been decapitated. Toreador at this point are caught in this mix of wanting to be in the spotlight but having to hide in the shadows.
It's, as you're describing the modern knights now in 5th edition, instead of just considering who vampires are or were or what the old ways are, it is almost compelling us to examine our own modern society as knowledgeable human beings and being able to actively dip into that. When you're talking about these big three structures, a stool needs at least 3 legs in order for someone to sit on and be balanced. You're describing the Ventru, and the Ventru are very much a Google-type business, where they are broad, they're global, they can control the output, like ad-friendly, they have these algorithms, there's a set thing, like everything touches Google directly or indirectly. And then you get to the secret keepers, you get to that, and that's like a Facebook organization for the Tremere. And then we get over to the Toreador, and it's not necessarily central, but it does talk about a lot of different things, and that's almost like an Instagram or a Tumblr, like a very large, influential, maybe even almost like a Reddit kind of scenario. And here we are thinking about these ancient power structures and beings, and we can fully make these comparisons to now what is happening in today's world, and to use those as maybe even more visceral, because we are aware of this. We don't even just have a romantic vision of what it was like for a Ventru to infiltrate the old Catholic society that was ubiquitous in Western Europe. Now we think about, well, what happens if they are this sort of business, or they are the business, or that they've been behind the scenes, and just how our own lives are affected and touched. It's like pulling a veil. This whole time, Google that, that whole mantra, don't be evil and all that. We might have bought it for a while, but more and more, in our own, if we set the book aside, or even just consider it, okay, well, here's an alternative take on it. What are we looking at what's happening to Facebook? Facebook is losing activity. It's come under controversy for being hacked and for leaking information, and people aren't trusting or using Facebook as much. Google, for as much as it said don't be evil, is seen more and more now as a ubiquitous, controlling company. A lot of YouTubers I've seen are making videos just, it's not YouTube, it's AdTube. Who is the real audience here? Now, and then, of course, we get into all the other platforms that do offer individuals the chance to either rise up or burn out, or both, in some cycle, like a Twitter or an Instagram or a Tumblr or something. And just, many of us might consider, well, oh, you know, Tumblr, wink, wink, or you know, the colloquial term, a bunch of Tumblr arenas, where people are like super sensitive. It's all garbage. It's, you know, it's things like that because of the way that they carry themselves. You know, people who are too inflated and think that what they say just carries weight, when in fact that's not the case. They just have a bully pulpit, and it's bringing all this to our eyes as human beings, as players, that now we're projecting this through the medium of vampires as you're describing it.
That's kind of interesting take on it. I wouldn't have considered it, but Mnemonica actually ended up saying, as a metaphor, I'm figuring Brujah would be 4chan. Okay, so we want to talk Brujah. Let's end up talking about it, because Brujah and Gangrel, these two clans, one point, part of the Camarilla, have now seceded almost entirely. There are a few outliers, but for the most part, they finally said enough is enough. And one of the biggest splits was that these two clans have now fell immediately into the Anarch camp. Okay? Now, if you end up having this ivory tower where they're trying to cling on to what power they have and what influence, they're still using some of the old methodology, which doesn't always work, but when it works huge. It's a high roll. Now, the flip side of that, the Anarchs, you told me living off the grid. Anarchs do that best. Anarchs have learned that, you want to know what? If we keep to a small profile, if we keep to ourselves, if we end up keeping low, we're in the clear. We don't communicate via cell phones too frequently. Or if we do, we might end up grabbing a payphone. We end up making it a point that we are leaving etchings on the walls. We are currently using graffiti. We are finding ways to contact and describe territory, dividing the city up while being able to end up keeping it relatively low key. This is absolutely huge. So what you end up finding with Brujah especially is huge amounts of counterculture. That's their big thing, is they are looking to be, each one of them effectively has the blood of a leader in them. And Brujah, at their absolute core, is the rebel with a cause. They have a cause, and they will live and die by that credo. The thing is that makes Brujah have a hard time is the fact that Brujah don't always end up in the same line. One might end up believing that we need a true democratic society, that amongst kindred, that's the only way to do it. Another one might end up having more of a communist argument, where he truly believes that, guess what? It works on a small scale. If we don't make it a huge scale, we're good. Mm-hmm. Another one might be more about the arts, almost mimicking a toreador. Another one might simply be all about the destruction of a current power stance, because guess what? You can't come up with new ideas. You can't build something new if you're building on old, rotted foundations. Right? So all of these can end up in Clan Brujah and never work well together.
That's, yeah, I agree. And you know what? I think that if we're going to make an internet presence kind of comparison, the Brujah would fit into that 4chan style of, here's brutal honesty, you know, here's the best and the worst of people, and it's a free form. You know, you don't like it? Survival of your ideas. It's not catered or controlled like a Reddit would be with upvotes or whatnot. This is raw, pure voices, and you either like the idea or you don't. And in either case, I don't care. Go take a walk. I said my piece, and you're either going to like it or not. And I do want to ask though, because at least in the old lore, there was always the rumor of the true Brujah, or what the Brujah were before they were as we know Brujah. How has this been addressed, or has it been in 5th edition?
I haven't run into it too frequently. So the one thing you need to understand about 5th edition, okay? The best way, in fact, I would say that the surprising thing. No, you didn't hear a Maca baby. I have no babies. I make sure of that. I eat my offspring. But that being said, this book is literally your core book. Okay, this not only explains mechanics and base lore, but it goes through 7 clans. As far as everything else, you end up looking at, we end up having moments where it's talking about city construction, a few advanced systems where you can go through its disciplines, which the disciplines is a heavy chapter. Vampires explaining some abilities, stuff like blush of health and what have you. Character creation. But ultimately, this entire book is a core book. Now, that being said, and I gotta double check this, but they're releasing a Camarilla book and an Anarch book, and I'm pretty sure they'll be coming up with more supplements in that regard. So they're almost following a D&D style release, because what happened, and for those of you who don't know, Vampire 25th anniversary, or 20th anniversary, would end up taking this bit where they packed in as much rules and edited out as much of the lore as possible. The reason being is it was literally a one-catch book, and the assumption right out of the gate was, you already know the lore.
Yeah.
You're not buying this because this is your first foray into Vampire.
Yeah.
Likely you are buying this because you've been involved in this from the jump.
Yep.
Right? This book does not make that assumption. Okay? So, with this book, you have your 7 core clans. Now, a lot of people would... It's much like D&D, right? D&D, if you did just the core book, you can get decades just out of the core book. But eventually, somebody's going to end up saying, well, I want to end up running an Asima. I want to run a Kenku. I want to run something, outside of it. That's where your supplements are going to kick in. But for now, we're going to end up focusing on the core, if you don't mind, Maddie.
No, that's fine. I would rather, kind of like what Chaotic said, so it's newbie friendly. It is, and I would like you to consider Vampire 5th Edition as just that. It's not really even a reboot, it's a representation of this game that does have a long history in lore and mechanics, and it's meant to be approachable. It's meant for newer players that maybe have always been curious about playing this kind of a system, and to have it be more friendly, because with the other editions, maybe it could feel for some people that it was a bit of an ivory tower. I've played Vampire for 10 years, and all of a sudden we have a new person who wants to come in, and now there's all this lore. There's a very... the player base for Vampire or World of Darkness is a lot more focused or specialized, and so it can create, even inadvertently, in my opinion, it can create a more difficult barrier of entry to a newer player, because there are so many people who've played for so long, or they're lore hounds, and they stick to everything that's so deep and it's so compelling. That for a new player just coming in, it might feel a lot more intimidating. And then, of course, World of Darkness is more obscure than D&D is, and so they're willing to take this jump into a new system, and then they say, but this system's been out for so long, it's been so played, or the player groups are farther and fewer between than D&D games, but those groups might have special house rules, or they might say, no, this is Camarilla only, and so therefore all the other content is taken off the table, or something along those lines, so that you're faced with a situation of, if I want to play Vampire, it's with this one group in a 60-mile radius around us, and I got to play by their rules, and is that really Vampire, or is that just me, approaching their game? So, no, go ahead.
Ironically, that actually segues a little bit, because you're talking about, loner, new wolf, that kind of thing. We're talking about Gangrel at that point.
Yes.
Because in order for that kind of psychology, we'd be looking at a survivor. And that's what Gangrel are. Gangrel is probably the most animalistic pack, because they have one thing that puts them above a lot of other clans. They understand what they are, what kind of a monster they are. They don't try and pretend to be anything else. They don't try and flower it up. They know. They know just how monstrous they can be. And to the point where it might be a little bit fun to kind of just let go once in a while. But when you're the new guy, you're probably running Anarch. You know why? Because guess what? You don't have any of the old capes currently lording over you. You might be able to make a friend or two in the Anarchs. Someone who might show you the ropes. On the other hand, the flip side is Ventrue and the Camarilla almost view this as a necessity. If they don't teach you the rules, you are now a liability.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when it comes down to... I'm going to jump back, actually, because, sorry, Scatterbrain. Chaotic, you said it's new player friendly. It is for one key reason. The entire situation basically was set up, built up, so many years worth of lore, over 20 years worth of lore, and somebody just threw a hand grenade in the middle of it. Right? So what's gotten out intact? What's still standing? What isn't standing? Who are the big bosses that suddenly either went to ground or are suddenly dead? Those change the power dynamics, which means that there's a lot of influence that can end up taking. Nosferatu. Oh, we're gonna have some fun here. Okay.
I'm not familiar with that acronym or the acronym. The biggest PITA. Oh, pain in the ass. Got it. All right. And then Daly said something about an Ancilla bundle that's coming out too.
Yeah, I took a look at it, and I'm kind of tempted. But the big thing right now, as far as we've listed 5 clans. We got Ventrue, we got Tremere, we got Toreador, we got Brujah, and we got Gangrel. This leaves 2 clans in here that are unaccounted for. Now, if the Brujah and the Gangrel end up making up the bulk of the Anarchs, and the Camarilla is built up primarily by Ventrue, Tremere, and Toreador, your high clans and low clans, where does that end up leaving your classic Nosferatu and Malkavians? Nosferatu, the name it does exactly what it says on the can. If you remember the old Nosferatu film, you remember something that looks monstrous. Okay? Nosferatu can't hide what they are without particular tricks.
Yeah.
They're not just a pair of fangs. They are pustules that ooze permanently. One of my favorites invoked by the Gentleman Gamer was this almost plating of fingernails growing along in weird patterns along the external of flesh, the hair being falling out of the scalp. Sorry, Maddie. And there's just no mistaking that you are a monster at all, right? So you are currently hiding. So how do you get ahead in this? Well, the Nosferatu are good at one thing. They're good at secrets. They can get into wherever they don't want to be got, or wherever they aren't wanted. They can get in. They can listen to the whispers. They can follow you without you knowing it. They are the boogeyman, that shadow at the corner of your eye. They are the thing that is constantly there and not there. And ultimately, they ended up finding out one of my favorite lines. I found out the contents of a man's letters was worth far more than the contents of his purse.
Yes.
They can be spy masters, and they can be enforcers, incredible enforcers. You are talking about something that you won't see coming and will snap your spine into on a whim. You are talking to something who commands over animals, such as the rat and the bat, the cockroach and the wolf. These are its pets, and you will know its domain because the rats will watch you. And they'll let this Nosferatu know exactly when you've come into its lair. It knows, because that's what it does. It knows. And it's very good at what it does. So ultimately, despite the fact you are hideous, the fact that everybody is repulsed, even though the vampires would look at you and they turn an eye. They can't look you in the eye because you are physically as repulsive as what their souls are.
I would have to
fear.
I'd have to imagine there's power in fear, and there's also power for people who have the ability to go and grasp it, with all the power structure being shattered, and so whatever we can think in video game terms, there's like these power energy capsules all around, waiting for other people to step in or step up. We can make a comparison to a lot of modern day organizations or events. There's at least here in the U.S., everyone's like, oh, Russian hackers. Well, I mean, it might be more one-sided than the other. But in politics, who hacked the DNC database? Was the election rigged with a bunch of Russian hackers? Who's actually breaking into the very same Facebook we were talking about and taking information? And so these are opportunity grabs. And we have organizations like Anonymous, speaking of 4chan, which the two are the same thing but different. The Brujah may run the message board, but there's actually people inside the message board who coordinate events. And it is a Nosferatu. If you can't go about gallivanting and going to social balls, you have a lot more free time, or you have a lot more opportunity to take any little crumb of cheese, to go on the animals that you were talking about. They are those animals that, the cockroaches and the mice that will eat the crumbs, but you eat enough of them, or you stumble into the right place, you worm into the right file. The contents of a political party's database is worth a lot more than the money they have in their bank, because then you're the one who becomes the power structure. Where the Nosferatu, the Nosferatu before Derek, they were a part of the Camarilla, but they were the messengers. Like, they were you're a part of us, but kind of, don't be seen, but do what we say.
Yeah, and there's no prince who's ruled over a city who has crossed the Nosferatu and managed to maintain domain for very long. The one thing that the Nosferatu have going for them, you may have noticed, a lot of clans are either individualistic or highly regimented, right? This has been true for Gangrel, Brujah. It's been true for Hib, Ventru, Toreador, and Tremere. But Nosferatu are heavily different because they are communal.
Yeah.
They're one of the few, because when you are a hideous monster, and ultimately you need to be around somebody, you can't maintain that isolation for long without losing yourself. Where do you turn but other monsters? And that is an incredible power. Now, I'll just drop this little bit of lore. It is theorized by some that the whole reason we are in this situation of governments, agencies knowing, and hunters is having a sudden information flood of kindreds coming and goings is because of the Nosferatu. Because when somebody eventually found an ancient database, effectively, maintained by the Nosferatu called Shreknet, when that was finally breached, it was amazing on how the Nosferatu held so many secrets for every clan except their own.
Mm.
Kind of fascinating about that, isn't it?
Dun dun dun.
Now, the last little bit, Malkavians. And I know we got a few Malkavians in the audience right now.
Yeah, a couple people were talking about that.
Malkavians, I have a special relationship with. I ended up playing a Malkavian for a year and a half in New Sarum. I absolutely love this clan, and it is one of the most flavorful clans in the entire book, in my opinion. But I think they tried to end up toning down a few things, because the clan unto itself has nothing in common. You might have noticed we end up having all of these, like, we got the high businessmen and people of power in Clan Venture. We have Bruja, who is filled with a whole bunch of people who are fixated on ideologies. We have Toreadors, which are beautiful and high art critiques, and people who are obsessed with needing to feel alive. We have specialists in Clan Tremere. Malkavians can be anybody. Anybody can become part of this clan, because the clan has no set standard, and the reason that they have no set standard is because the only thing they have in common is insanity. Or at least that's how it was portrayed. Now, in earlier editions, all the time we ended up having a lot of people end up claiming that they are insane, certifiably. But in 5th edition, it kind of brings this into question. Because while they may have some difficulties with maintaining themselves or their own grip on reality, they might be overplaying it to hide what really is there. If you can't fake being sane, fake what the illness might be. And when I say they're all crazy, yes, some of them suffer from fits of depression, some of them schizophrenia, some of them are bulimic. But when I say that they're crazy, to use other vernacular, you got to remember that this is not Looney Tunes, hey, look at me, I'm in the straitjacket.
Yeah.
This is Jeffrey Dahmer at your table. This is Charles Manson at your table. This is Jack the Ripper at your table. So when I say crazy, remember, ultimately, a vampire is a predator. And because they are a predator, that means that that instinct to feed, to kill, to harm, and rip and tear, that instinct that is in every vampire, the beast, as they call it, well, that's paired up with someone whose understanding of the world might be a little bit off. Makes them a high risk. So why keep them around, right? Well, here's the thing. Think the Mad Seer. They don't know what they're seeing. They might not fully understand it, but Malkavians have this innate ability to put pieces together that no one else will. They have a way of grasping information from a glance. They might know your name. From handling something as simple as your wallet, they could tell you where you've been in the past 24 hours. They get information that most people should never get. And it's very difficult, especially when what they have is the cobweb, or what some people have termed the Malkavian Madness Network.
Yeah. Because
all Malkavians are interlinked. It's almost like a psychic phenomenon. It's, I have a thought and it shows up in Maddie's head. The problem is this is happening for thousands of Malkavians, so it suddenly turns into white noise, but maybe, just maybe, you can glean something that another might have thought of, or start thinking like somebody else. And so you are now given this degree of insight. So now they become seers and advisors and sneaks. The clan, arguably, Clan Nosferatu would fear most is Clan Malkavian, because Nosferatu require structure to understand.
Yeah.
They are used to being hidden. They are the thing that's supposed to be always away. How do you escape somebody who just with a glance could know where you are?
Yeah.
A whisper suddenly have an understanding of your intentions before you understood your own intentions of the situation. How do you get ahead of that?
Well, and especially being frustrating as a Nosferatu, you work for your knowledge, you trade, you play the long game, and a Malkavian can simply come up and, on the off chance, all has been revealed, and your best laid plans are now just they're there because someone had just inadvertently rippled a thought out through this collective unconsciousness, and everyone sort of turned it over in their own brain, their own unique perspective, and an answer came back, and there you go.
Yeah, but the thing is, and I love this metaphor. Malkavians know all the answers, but they don't know the questions.
Oh yeah, I like that.
that is ultimately their problem, is the fact that they can get this information, but they don't understand it. They don't quite understand what they're seeing. And we'll get into disciplines, but they have a key one that that's very easy for them to get, which is called dementation. Now, beforehand, it used to be, stuff like Eyes of Chaos and what have you. But they can get visions and of anything they're concentrating on, and ultimately get a vision that might be able to give them a little bit of a peek, but it's never straightforward. They don't always understand what it is they're seeing or they're experiencing. They can easily become confused, irritable. And again, we're talking about when a Malkavian gets irritable and that monster inside, the beast, starts to take over, it's going to end particularly violently, which gets a lot of attention you really don't need.
You get hangry.
So these are the 7 clans, and Nosferatu and Malkavian can float between these two sects quite easily. A Ventrue, being a part of the Anarchs, has a very different, almost libertarian attitude, typically. A Bruja who is a part of the Camarilla is probably one who believes full-heartedly in structure of the old. The old ways, the ways that survived, are best. So until something comes along that's older, that has survived longer, there's no reason to change.
Are they considered anti-tribu, or is that its own thing with the Sabbat?
That would still consider anti-tribu,
okay.
I believe. Though you got to remember, these terms that we're throwing around, many of them don't throw around anymore.
All right. Oh, so the old guard is going to have to reprogram themselves to catch up in modern knights, right?
Yeah, and that's a huge thing, right? Because, especially if you're an old-time vampire player, you're going to have to remember that a lot of the stuff you take for granted, such as my need to refer to vampires as kindred, right? You might notice I actually stumbled to say the word vampire, is because of a particular level of training that newer players just won't have. But that's fantastic for this particular edition. Now, with those, we end up having a core bit. So what has changed? We know that the realm has changed. We know the situation has changed. What about the rules? Maddie, you want to talk on that one a bit?
What has changed in the rules of 5th Ed for Vampire? I haven't really looked into that system.
No, it's okay. You'll find this fascinating.
As far as I know, in here, we'll use this as a base of operations. I'm presuming that it's still a D10 based system.
Yep.
With successes and failures that will dictate perhaps further successes or just sort of abysmal failures. And I imagine that it's still using the dot structure for the character sheets, which is kind of a logarithmic, like 1 dot, everyone has it. And when you get to 5 dots, you might be one of 100 people in the entire world that can do that one thing. So it's a kind of a power scale over 5 dots that just sort of like, woo, it really goes up there.
Well, here's the simple way to say it, okay? You have 2 different bits, okay? You have effectively attributes and skills.
Okay.
These, what you are physically capable of, how sharp you are, how tough you are, how strong you are, how charismatic you are, how manipulative you are, or how pretty you are, these kinds of stats, right? Let me just double check, because I got to print out a character sheet that's currently gone through hell. But they've kind of they learned their lesson from Requiem. And I kind of like this because it's actually I shouldn't say perfect blend, but it's a really good blend between what the old school vampire was and the new world. And one of the things I really liked about this system is it's fairly simple, but the difficulty comes down to hunger. One of the core things that has changed is now we are really focused on trying to end up getting down to earth. Remember, we talked about these high politics.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this game is probably best played in the streets at that level.
Okay.
Right? The reason I say that is because ultimately, hunger, the ability to feed, one of the taglines they like to use, you are what you eat, or more accurately, who you eat. This is huge. It is absolutely huge, because one of the things that used to happen was you would start to get hungry, and if a situation arises, the ST would basically call for a check. Now you're being checked for everything, and it's really simple. You have these D10s. These D10s, you roll 6 or higher is a success. The difficulty of the task says how many successes you need.
Okay.
Fairly straightforward. Here's the problem. Every time you're hungry, or each dot of hunger, so you get these in stages. If you're at 1 dot of hunger, you kind of just, you get by, but you could eat. That changes one of your die into a blood die, effectively. Or a hunger die, I should say. And what happens here is that hunger die is all of a sudden a danger. That hunger die can start to influence your behavior. So a simple example is, I want to end up getting through this door that's been locked.
Okay.
Okay? And I'm really hungry. And I roll, and I get this critical success. But that it's just an amazing amount of successes. But that was mostly because my hunger dice ended up rolling really well. So I do manage to get through the door, but instead of lockpicking and finessing to try and keep quiet, I start using the lockpick, and that hunger just makes me hangry. I grab hold of the door, and I tear the door off, hucking it to the other side of the street. These moments of lashing out start to impact you. These moments where the beast, that this predatory instinct that all vampires have, starts to seep into your mind and starts making you behave in ways that are sometimes predatory in nature, sometimes a little worse.
Is humanity still a thing, or is this kind of reflective of a floating level of humanity based on how sated you are?
Humanity is still a thing, but it's more a case of how are you going about the situation. Like, let me just go over this real quick. Your biggest thing when it ends up coming down to hunger, ambitions, generations, all this kind of stuff, you still end up having these moments where you're trying to end up keeping it all together. Now, admittedly, they took the humanity system and removed it as you understand it.
Okay.
The biggest thing that you're going to end up realizing is that you instead have touchstones and chronicle tenants. These kind of replace it in a certain way. So one of the things that you need to understand is that you are trying to keep your humanity. So for those of you who don't know, I keep referring to this thing called a beast, and that is ultimately what the vampire is. If a vampire were to suddenly remove all of its humanity, the thing that makes the person, and we only focus on the animal that is a kindred, is a vampire. This is kill, feed, sleep, repeat. That's all that it really understands. Survive at all costs. It's an animal. The only thing that separates you from that is knowing who you are and anchoring yourself. And unfortunately, what starts to happen is that this means you need to keep connected with humanity. This is probably the one part of the game I like and don't like at the same time. And the reason is because I love the fact that you can get touchstones and convictions. These are, the grocery lady or the grocer at the end of the street who works late night shift, right? This is a person you go to and you kind of talk to. You either mentor them, or they help you out, or they keep you grounded in some way. They keep you grounded with humanity. They make you look past the need for just blood and power. But they're also something that keeps you together. And if they're threatened, if they are damaged or if they are killed, this can actually cause your character to devolve.
Ah.
There are also chronicle tenets and personal tenets called convictions. Long story short, if we get together as a group, we choose a few chronicle tenets. These are the universal rules that we all believe should be a guide on what we need to do to keep our humanity. So, for instance, one group might say never kill. So that's going to be a very different group than the group that agrees never kill unless in self-defense.
Yeah.
Right? Just that one stipulation changes the game, but that also means now the group kind of has this ability to end up saying, we're going to set on a bunch of rules we are going to agree upon. Because that was one of the problems that ended up happening in most of the other editions is, and I can't believe this would happen no matter how many times I'd explain it. The fact is that every time you do a horrible action, and you can justify it, so you are putting off the emotional weight of what you've just done, the fact that you just burned down an entire apartment building with everybody in it because, there was a Methuselah that was going to do something 10 times worse. Well, we needed to do this. You have just justified a monstrous act. That's what the beast does. Ultimately, that whole kill, feed, eat, repeat, that whole thing is completely justifiable to the beast. And this is one of those things you need to end up keeping in play. This is one of those points you need to end up considering at all times. I like that concept. You still have your disciplines and all this kind of stuff. You still have the concepts. You have ambitions and desires, which are kind of like your short-term and your long-term stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You get extra experience for trying to complete these tenets, for trying to end up going, this is what I'm trying to complete in this section.
Mm-hmm.
How do I interweave this into the story? I do like that. One of the things I don't like, and I really don't like this, is that you actually have different types of predators. Basically what this is how you feed, and what type of people you tend to feed on. Simple example.
Okay.
Right? You could be the person who feeds on people in nightclubs.
Okay.
All right? That's one method of feeding. You have these innate ability to be able to end up going in and finding somebody and take them home. Reasonable, fairly safe. I find it hilarious on how many players don't want to actually take that person to like a motel or something where they have some privacy. They almost always want to feed in the nightclub, which never made sense to me. But also, because every time, almost without fail, this leads to what we like to call a basic feeding scene. You would have another one who can only feed, or who will only feed, as a moral imperative, on, Diablerizing is still a thing. We'll get to that in a second. We'll have one that can only feed on blood bags, all right? We have another one who feeds on their own family. So they haven't processed their death certificate and all this and remade themselves. They are still pretending to be alive. They are still amongst their family, and they are feeding on their family. Right? You have a few different types. My problem with it mostly comes down to the fact that it really doesn't open it up that much. It tries to cover a wide array and ultimately fails to do so by being a little bit too narrow, I guess is the best way I can put it. It's just too narrow of a scope. And if you've played Vampire for any length of time, you will eventually run into the fact that you will come up with some very, very creative ways to continue feeding. And this also includes stuff like what we're discussing in the chat by 12 for 10, Diablerie, the drinking of the amaranth. Because vampires can eat one another.
Mm-hmm.
They can become cannibalistic in that regard. And this is something I actually like a little bit more. rather than generations. And remember how I told you the generations removed from Cain thing was something, I liked it more as lore of a what if or a theoretical, not a fact. One of the things that they did was they actually went to what is called a blood potency system. So, long story short, blood potency, the more potent your blood, the more powerful you generally are. Elders typically have a very high blood potency, so much so that they can't actually feed on human blood. They need other vampires to do so.
Oh, wow.
They need to feed on another vampire. That's how they get along, which changes their dynamic entirely.
Yeah.
If your blood is too potent, you can't feed on animals. Now, here's the thing. Your blood potency actually factors into how powerful your abilities are, heavily, and will start to influence almost everything you do. And your abilities will eventually make you hungry. Also, side note, Maddie.
Yeah.
Hunger, since this is this was the focus I was trying to get back to.
Mm-hmm.
Every time you use an ability, every time you use Blush of Health, the ability to make yourself look a little bit more a little bit more flush, give your skin some degree of warmth, the ability to leave fingerprints, this kind of thing. Every time you use an ability like this, or dominate, the ability to say, dance, right? And the person will suddenly break into a dance routine as, is good and proper. These kinds of abilities, a lot of them require a check. So rather than automatically spending a blood, it's you roll and see, is this making you more hungry or not? So there is a chance that you can actually get away with a lot of power usage. Not a big one, but there is a chance that you can get away with a lot of power usage and not make yourself more hungry.
But does it still consume blood points from your pool, or?
No, you don't have a pool. That's the thing.
Oh, gotcha.
What I was telling you about the dice, right? Every time that goes up by one, you now are replacing a die in your pool for rolling anything.
Okay, so you don't have to. All right, because I remember in older editions, heck, just waking up at night cost you a blood point. Just
this, you would roll a die and see did it make you more hungry or not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But remember, every time that you get more hungry, you are changing another dice into a hunger die, which can make you act out. Right? You are losing control because eventually that beast will feed.
Yeah.
And it will force you to do it one way or another. So you constantly are at war with this ability to see how far can you push yourself before you suddenly lose it.
Okay, I like that approach. I understand what you're saying about the narrow definitions on how to feed, but generally, as far as the system, I think it does an excellent job of conveying that hunger, which is an essential part of the vampire. That's the constant, eternal. Well, as long as a vampire's eternal. That is the eternal struggle that they have with themselves, is this need to feed in the world. And I think that mechanic does a good job of reflecting that, because nothing is as easy as, look, just waking up is going to make you hungry. Humans at least might be able to go for a while, if they do get hungry, they don't get as destructive, but for you, everything tempts you. Everything is that devil and angel on your shoulder, having you think about all these things that perhaps you never did before. What's the most efficient route to take, because you could just give in, and this is a very dangerous society to turn into an animal, because you're going to show up on a lot of radars a lot more quickly. And so if you do mess up, there could be very dire consequences.
Yeah, there is. And especially with the new threats, right? Because beforehand, your threats were the Sabbat, the rival group of vampires. Well, guess what? A good portion of the Sabbat did not make it out from the Second Inquisition. Right? Because Sabbat tend not to be that good, especially if you're Shovelhead or a lower generation. You tend to be pretty loud and proud. You're a monster and you revel in it. Well, unfortunately, in this kind of world, that kind of behavior is now being called out and is causing a lot of problems. A lot of Sabbat have left to now try and hunt down specifically what's left of the elders. They have their own reasons for doing this, which isn't made 100% clear. I'm sure that the source book will end up saying a few bits on that, but I look forward to seeing that little bit of lore. Let's see here.
I can see too where, with the Sabbat being as overt as they have been, where we talked about the Nosferatu maybe tipping a hand or giving up a database or something. The Sabbat are very loud. They're the it was brought up earlier in chat. I got to get used to pointing here because where it's at right now. That they are the. They're the loud protesters, the Antifa, or the people who want to, protest something and then set the downtown on fire as a part of their peaceful protest. And so that can draw a lot of attention. And then, of course, because they're louder, they're more violent, that has the social tendency to override or color over the actual movement or the actual philosophy. And so, whereas the Camarilla, they wanted to stay in peace. Like, give them their food, give them their due, and they will keep everyone in line. But now with the Sabbat and everything, this scab has been picked, all this ooze is pouring out, and they're the low-hanging fruit for the Inquisition because they're the people who are the most loud and violent and obnoxious. And then, of course, in a public eye, or even if it's not widely public, but at least within the CIA realms, if that's all the CIA knows, every vampire is a savage monster who just wants to bite and feed and cause destruction, meaning that there's a larger imperative to have to put down all vampires because they're all vampires. They're all the same. And, I don't want to. I want to be careful because while we're having some fun, tongue in cheek, this clan is this organization, and you know what? Many times our role playing does reflect what's happening around us. Comic books can reflect, real life societal trends or whatever. I do want to make sure that we are talking openly and in a certain context, and I think we can talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll in this context. I do want to make sure, though, for political movements or if it starts getting into real life, racial perceptions or things like that, that we're making analogies, but we're also not, because look, White Wolf already came under fire for apparently supporting Nazis, and this is a whole thing of that some people can just take way too far. So I think we're safe where we're at, but I do want to make sure that we can make these connections, but I also don't want to say, yes, this X is Y. For sure, 100% confirmed. I read it on Reddit. I tumbled it on Tumblr, and it was clearly on 4chan in their tabletop games section.
But here's the thing, right? The game itself kind of assumes a certain level of maturity and understanding amongst its players and the storyteller, okay? What I found hilarious, more than anything, is there's an expectation here that, or I shouldn't even say expectation. The first thing you need to remember is, if the game is set using real life as a setting, this stuff can come up. That's just a fact, okay? In fact, I think one of the hardest things as an ST is sometimes trying to end up making sure that if this becomes a factor, if one of your players is playing an individual who is very much a protester, is very much about this, like that kind of life.
Yeah.
Well, you better be able to research and understand not only their version of it, but you need to be able to end up convincingly be able to do the opposite. And as an ST, as a DM, we do this all the time. We're constantly playing, perspectives that are not our own. But if you're wanting to bring that into your game, understand that, almost everybody at the table needs to be cool with it. I'm going to use a little less politically charged version, but one that particularly ended up getting under my skin. I had a player, and this was a home game. I had a player who was trying to end up, using this as an escape, which I was fine with. They were socially struggling, and mostly on the fact that they had a lot of internal issues. Unfortunately, I ended up also having another player who Well, bluntly, it decided to end up using this pretty much the same bits. Now, they weren't aware because I didn't want to disclose. They didn't openly disclose to the rest of the group, so I wasn't going to do that on their behalf. But they were starting to play what we call a fish milk. And what we mean by that is fish Malkavian is a reference, I believe, to Monty Python, where you see two people beating each other with giant fish. That's just basically being very stupid and irresponsible. And they took it to a point of where they wanted to end up saying, my character's crazy, so I'm going to end up doing some really stupid things. They seem to have confused heavily the idea of somebody who might be mentally ill versus stupid.
Like a Looney Tunes, like, I'm crazy, kind of a thing.
I wish it was that subtle.
Oh.
I wish it was that subtle. Suffice it to say, this kind of turned into a lot of hurt feelings, right?
Yeah.
So much so that person was forcefully ejected from the game.
I do recall this. I'm not saying this to stop you because I think there's new people since when you told it, and this is an excellent tale from the tabletop that was completely, well, it was based in a game, but it was a very meta thing between you as physical people, as the storyteller and the player. But yeah, it got to quite the crescendo that ended up coming crashing down. To put it lightly, yeah.
I said he was physically removed from the game, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But this kind of thing can happen, and this is actually one of the things I like about Fifth. Okay, is the Chronicle tenets, right? You can basically put in something that says, you know what? This is either a social faux pas or you can do it, but it's at a risk of your humanity. There is a mechanical incentive to change a methodology of play based on the group's consensus, right? You have your personal ones, but you also have the group ones, right? And these do end up charging into your humanity. And the lower your humanity gets, the worse it gets for you. So try not to lose humanity too quick. A lot of people look at humanity almost like I want to say like a throwaway bit, but it's not. It is your ability to maintain who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that erodes in a game that is where you are a predator. You are surrounded by predators and hunters and people who are trying. I've watched mere fatigue and boredom derail a game. Oh, I wish that that never happens to you ever again then. Yeah, 12, I really do.
Mm.
Now, here's the thing. Ultimately, this game, when you're playing it, is personal and political horror. Your political leanings, be it Camarilla or Anarch, will end up causing a conflict between what's going on and everything you actually care about. This is one of the reasons why you have these touchstones, these people or places or things you care about, right? Best touchstone reference I can think of right of the way is Pulp Fiction and The Watch.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with that scene, but I'm not going to reenact it because this is a PG-13 and I'm not dropping my trousers for that. Suffice it to say, it's a very uncomfortable piece of metal that has been hidden away from particular camps and parties until it finally got back to soldier's son. So that if you watch Bruce Willis's character, he goes through hell and high water to get that thing back. Right? That's kind of what a touchstone is. It's a thing that keeps him grounded into who he is. And this is part of tracking humanity and what have you. So you have this, and there's a whole bunch of other little bits in the system, but I feel like I'm deviating away. We talk systems, we talk clans, but I don't think we've really given anybody a good sense of how this game is played. And it's not far off from the old editions. So, Maddie, in fact, I would invite you, since you do have some experience, and what what was a typical game for you like?
Primarily, it was we were members, or at least we were aligned with the Camarilla or the Camarilla. Just force a habit, I use the soft Y with the two L's. And we would be given a mission by a primogen, or the prince would have everyone together and say, I need someone who can step up and take care of this problem. We're all members of the community. Who's going to do it? And then, of course, we have our little coterie, or our little group of friends, or sometimes we just be voluntold. And so we would go out on these missions in order to preserve the Masquerade, or to recover something of importance, or to put down, maybe if not necessarily violating the Masquerade, but there's a vampire that came into town that's causing problems for other vampires, completely clandestine to the, I was about to say the Sleepers, that was from Mage, to the Kine, or however they're referred to as in 5th. And so we would have to go and take care of these problems as a group. And, kind of D&D party adventure at that point, infiltrate the warehouse, travel from point A to point B, a little bit of resource management, gather some information, or before the, we'll use a good stereotype, before the Nosferatu will give you the information, they have something that they need first. You have to offer payment to them. Because they'll give you info, or they'll give you technically the information that the prince wanted you to have, such as, it's like a carefully worded wish spell. They'll give you the code to the keypad to get into the warehouse. They might forget to tell you that there are advanced security systems around the warehouse that will probably catch you and have you shot for trespassing. But if you give them that little bit of extra knowledge, they technically gave you what you needed at the prince's behalf, but there's so much more they can offer if only you would help them in return.
Yeah. Okay. That's... So, yeah, Maddie... 12, I'm going to touch on that in a second, but I'm Tish. But... Maddie's is a perfectly legitimate method of play, and the reason I say this is because it's very structured. Now, this sounds, very akin to D&D, and guess what? It can be played that way. But Vampire unto itself is not a party game by its definition. Ultimately, you are out for number one. And this is where the nature of the game shifts based on who's playing it. But this shows a very good amount of flexibility. So, mine is the opposite. The players come together out of a necessity, because ultimately, none of them are powerful enough that if anybody of even a little bit more experience comes in, could probably roll them at any given time. And this doesn't have to be in physical combat. This could be, guess what, you got evicted from your home, and how you've been hiding in that subway tunnel. Well, it just sucks because, they're currently thinking about restarting the subway program, so you're going to have to move, or you're going to get drilled out one way or another. You happen to be hiding under this bridge, and you're trying to hide from your enemies, and all of a sudden you end up catching whispers that they might end up knowing where your family is. This kind of thing happens.
Yep.
The way my games typically end up going is that everybody is coming together to try and help one another, because it's more beneficial. They're stronger together than they are separate, but ultimately they are trying to get over one another. They are ultimately trying to take a little bit more power. They're trying to figure out, yes, we gave that Nosferatu what they wanted and the key code, but I ended up maybe slipping them a bill in the term of a small boon, saying, you know what, if you need anything, call me ahead of time. Give me some of the insider info. When things go south, I want to be the first person you call. Well, that sets up you to be on top, right? So now instead of the Nosferatu owing your coterie, they now owe you, and it's your coterie that now gets in on the action, but owing through you. You start figuring out who owes who and where that ultimately stems from, putting you in a position of power. I also love the fact that it looks like you're sitting in Strahd's chair right now.
It does, doesn't it?
But 12, you ended up saying the new violations. Okay, so the tenets of the Masquerade need to be upheld. Yes, there is a list of 6 tenets. These are rules from the Camarilla that the Camarilla have said this is sacred law. You will not breach it. You will continue to end up existing in this way. The Anarchs have done the exact opposite. They end up saying, no, you want to know what? There's only one rule. Don't get caught. Okay? You don't let any of the kind know that we exist. You keep things quiet, and we're cool. On the other hand, if you let slip, you know, the Anarchs, because of the way they live low to the ground. They might use burner phones, but they're communicating through tags and all this kind of stuff and rumor mill. They don't own the fancy nightclubs anymore because guess what? That's the obvious place a hunter will go. Mm-hmm. All the places that you're used to, they're constantly being watched. You might have a private club at the edge of town that, you know, members only that you might have, but now it doesn't have the kind of feed. So now all of a sudden it becomes a new problem. Well, the Anarchs have stayed really low to ground, but because of that, none of them have developed all the connections, so when something goes wrong, they can get it covered. Right? They can't stop the NSA from finding out about what the hell went wrong, where your slip-up was. The Camarilla still try and do this, because that's ultimately how the Camarilla gets power, is to try and cover up your scrubs, and now you owe us. Kind of like
yeah,
right?
Yeah, yep. You have the CIA, but you have the Camarilla that's the CYA.
Yep. So you end up having this notion coming in. But 12, the biggest change that you'll probably notice is that elders, supposedly Hardstadt, one of the big dogs, I mean big, right, is no longer with us. Bruja put it in double-barrel shotgun, clipped his head. Now there's some rumors and doubt on that because Hardstadt was so old that, and I think at one story somebody tried to end up running an I-beam through him from about 20 stories up, and the I-beam bent. So they're kind of thinking, no, Hardstadt's not dead, or maybe that's just filthy lies being said to save their clan from embarrassment. Who knows? And that's one of the fantastic things about this, is that the lore is not set. It's not hard fact. This is just what you would have heard from the grapevine, the rumor mill.
So you're saying that Malkov could still be around too, or is that a confirmed kill?
He very well could be. That's one of the things that everybody ends up wondering, because, again, one of the problems that was happening with the old vampire lore was it was always set as though this stuff was fact, right? One of the greatest benefits from Requiem, which is where some of this system actually pulls from, and I'm talking about system, like mechanically, is that they started going back to, guess what, we're going to say this is what you might have been told, this is what's been believed, but that doesn't make it fact. Mm-hmm. Pneumonica, I'm glad you're back, because I wanted to actually make a note, because you ended up mentioning something fantastic. You played a librarian who purposely fed on anybody who came into the library and fell asleep there. I think that was fantastic. That is one of those little moves that illustrates exactly what I'm talking about, because not all feeding is equal. Not all of it's going to be the same.
Uh-oh. And
every methodology can be different. And this is one of the things that I didn't care for, was the baseline mechanics, because they tied in the type of predator you are to stats and what have you, and I wasn't a big fan of that. plus side, backgrounds are still around, resources, havens, all this kind of stuff. So you actually can start off with a lot of interesting resources to go.
Is that outside of flaws and merits? Is that its own thing, or are there flaws and merits still?
There are flaws and merits.
Okay.
In fact, they're actually merged.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, like a simple example, right? If we'll go with a very common one called resources. Now, for those of you who are wondering, right, backgrounds like resources are how much money do I typically have at any given time? How well off am I, right? Well, part of this is balancing flaws and what have you. So, if we end up going into that regard, one, you live paycheck to paycheck. 2, you're middle class. You got a nice apartment or small house, a few cars, high-end equipment. 3 is rich, great condo or nice house, luxury items, all this kind of stuff. 4 is wealthy. 5 is ultra rich, where literally you own several mansions and anything money can buy, you can get.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a flaw, a 1-dot flaw, which will go into character creation, what have you. That says destitute. You have no money and no home. Right? So you can actually pick that as a flaw, and now all of a sudden it's playing against you. And a lot of it took me a little bit to wrap my head around, because I was used to merits and flaws being always together and then your backgrounds being separate, but that's not how it is anymore. Instead, your flaws are almost as part of a scale. So you have your 0 end, your 1 dots, your 2 dots, your 3 dots, but going in the opposite direction are actually your flaws. So like Haven, for instance, 1 dot flaw, no Haven, obvious. Herd, right? You could actually have difficulties getting a herd, people who you can feed on reliably, by having a 2-dot flaw called obvious predator. There's something about you that makes everybody aware, no matter what your humanity level is, that you are a predator.
12 had that nice cover there too, that his character was an EMT.
Yep, and that's sometimes his situation where you got to end up figuring out, okay, how do I end up getting by? Myself, I've always loved high politics, right? If you ever have me as a player, you're going to find that I tend to lean towards Ventru, I tend to lean towards Toreador, which, to be fair, that's a new turn for me. Tzimisce, and I would typically end up going with Malkavian, because I like doing this high-end politics. I always liked being the cover for my party by being able to wheel and deal to put us in a good position. Is you could be the big badass Brujah who comes in to, kick names and take some... But ultimately, right, if things go south, he needs a backer. So I like being that backer. I like to be the guy who supports by wheeling and dealing and figuring out where the situation is and manipulating the chessboard. I love playing the role of chess master. And you're going to find that that's reflected in the types of games I run. A lot of my players will tell you, if the game goes to combat, you screwed up.
In fact, when you mentioned that and the Tzimisce clan, and we're also getting into what the contents of the 5th edition book have, does it also have an equivalent of a monster manual? Like, the Lasombra, I imagine, still have to exist, but what if I want to run a Lasombra inside of this game, but it doesn't have the stats for Lasombra? Or if I want to have a gargoyle, or if I want to have, something else that might not be directly mentioned.
Actually, there is one thing I wanted to end up bringing up.
Okay.
Because you actually have something called lore sheets. Now, these lore sheets are of type of background you can pick. The thing that makes these interesting is they tie you into the overall larger meta narrative. So there was one that reminded me of you immediately, because I thought you loved these two.
Wow, really? Well then,
You can actually be an asylum member or a performance monkey. Jeanette really likes you. You're reliable, so guess what? You're being brought in as talent. You can have Jeanette's favor, you can have Teresa's favor, or if you take all 5 dots, asylum operator. You actually are part of the franchise. You own one in your city.
oh, cool.
Right? So those of you who don't know, play Bloodlines, you will understand Therese and Jeanette Vorman. They are amazing. But this continues on quite a bit. As for a monster manual, yes, actually there is one. There's a bunch of antagonists, mortals, police detective, gangster, clergy, faith hunter, inquisitor, Inquisitor Delta, ghouls, animals. There's they have other vampires.
Do they have like generic Bruja? If one's gonna start a beef with you, then you turn there and.
Yeah.
Okay.
Creatures of horror, so they have werewolves, magicians, fairies, specters, and they're fairly simple because that's really not where the focus lies. They would be kind of a tertiary bit. Vampires don't by default always interact with other things because bluntly it's dangerous. I always got to call BS whenever I think of a kindred who is somehow said, "Oh yeah, I'm buddy with the werewolves." No, you are a part of the worm. You are an abomination in their eyes. They will kill you on sight. They just on principle they will try and kill you, right? You're getting buddy with them. What the hell happened there? It better be a good one, and it better be earned in game. You do not start with that kind of thing.
Yeah. that needs a very good explanation and connection to have that happen.
Just reading out what Mnemonica said. I did play a Malk who literally couldn't tolerate death. Yeah, it's bad for a vampire. He was also the night nurse at a blood clinic. Do you know you can donate blood and specifically market it do not use? Well, if you never want to hear ghoul, ooh, that's actually quite nice. That's quite nice. And this is kind of getting back to what I'm talking about. So Mnemonica's character there would be called a bagger. That's how they feed. That's their primary means of hunting. They actually gain by constantly feeding off blood bags. They're trying not to hurt anyone, right? And that's fantastic in that regard. However, I just realized it is 12:36, and I haven't stopped talking in a while. So, Maddie, is there anything you want to end up adding? If not, can we end up going for a quick, 10-minute break?
Yeah,
I have something to wet my whistle.
I think that we should take about a 10-minute break here. I'm good for now, but when we come back, I'm sure more questions or comments will come up. So everyone, Mnemonica, 12 for 10, Chaotic Blue, Coffee Cat, and all those who are out there lurking as creatures of the night as we're broadcasting late into it. Let's get up and take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back at, I guess it'd be 1:45 my time or 12:45 your time, Derek. And we'll continue our exploration into Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. Alright everyone, I have returned, and I have chips and salsa because it's just not going to be a Maddie stream unless I'm eating in front of you. Now that I sat down, let me catch up and chat again. Break Time, Chaotic Blues finding this informative so far. Coffee Cat, you like VTM 5e so far as well. Rin is agreeing 5e is pretty fun, and you're still prepping for a V5 stream. And, I see what you're saying, Derek. Yeah, I mean, it's like, like with anything, it'd be, you know, going through the player's handbook in an hour. I mean, there's just so much. And 12 for 10 is in it, and 12 for 10 is also ordering another ale from the wench. You know, you can order them 12 for 10, but it's not guaranteed that it won't end up as a full cup when it arrives to you.
Apparently.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much in these